I used to think the past was carved in stone. Immutable. Eternal. The kind of thing you could visit but never touch. I don't think that anymore. The year was 2043, and America was a shadow. Faded colors on a flag that no longer meant what it once did. Our cities sagged under the weight of neglect. Our voices muffled by laws passed in whispers. I was a relic myself. Part scientist, part dreamer, part fool. Haunted by a single day in history that I'd never even lived through. November 22nd, 1963. Dallas, Texas. The day the dream died. John F. Kennedy was more than a president in the history books. He was a symbol of youth, of vision, of a country that dared to look up at the moon and believe we could touch it. I'd read every speech, studied every photograph, memorized the tremor in his voice when he spoke of hope. And in the long winter of America's decline, I became obsessed with a question that hollowed me out. What if he had lived? They say desperate men do desperate things. I say desperate men invent machines that eat decades like seconds. My machine, my unholy marriage of physics and madness, could carry me back to that day in Dallas, to the moment before the shots rang out. And I told myself over and over that if I could save him, I could save us all. But there was a shadow on that hope, whispering to me in the sleepless hours. What if saving him destroys everything else? The night before I left, I stood alone in the lab, staring at the coils and humming wires, feeling the pull of history like a riptide. My heart pounded with a heady cocktail of fear and anticipation. This was it, the chance to rewrite the story of a nation. The leap was nothing like the equations promised. No elegance, no clean lines, just a violent, swirling storm of time itself, clawing at my skin, screaming in my ears. And then, Dallas, November air sharp with the scent of autumn leaves and motor oil. I hadn't been there 5 minutes when I saw her, a young journalist, eyes alight with ambition, the kind of smile that made you believe in something again. Her name would come later, but her presence hit me like the first breath after drowning. I hadn't planned for her. God help me, I hadn't planned for her. And as I would learn, she hadn't planned for me either. I thought the mission was simple. Stop the bullet, save the man. But history doesn't like being manhandled. Twists, it writhes, it resists. Every step toward Kennedy brought me deeper into a web of shadows. Government men with smiles like razors, whispers of coups and cover-ups, the gnawing fear that even the best intentions carry the seeds of ruin. There were nights when she and I sat beneath the stars, her head on my shoulder, and we spoke of the America that could be. An America without war in the jungles of Vietnam, without the bitterness and division that would follow. Her hand in mine felt like proof that we were doing the right thing. But in the back of my mind, that whisper never stopped. I saved him. I saved John F. Kennedy. And for one shining moment, it felt like the dawn of a new age. It wasn't. History bent, but it didn't break. It changed in ways I never foresaw, ways that bled into every corner of our lives. The wars we avoided gave rise to something darker. The freedoms we thought we'd preserved slipped quietly through our fingers. And one day, I woke to find myself in a country I didn't recognize, under a flag that still had 50 stars but none of the light. They call it the law of unintended consequences. I call it the cost of playing God. This is the story of how I saved a man and lost a nation. And if I could go back again, I'm not sure I'd pull the trigger.
Chapter 1. The Whisper from the Future.
The future has a sound. It's not the sleek hum of progress or the hopeful murmur of young voices. In 2043, the future is a low, constant hiss. The sound of wind scraping across broken buildings, of a nation breathing through cracked teeth. America wasn't dead. Not yet, but she was gasping. Cities sagged like old ships taking on water, and every conversation, those still brave enough to have them, ended the same way, with a shrug, a sigh, and the quiet admission that we had our chance. I was one of the last men who refused to believe that. My name doesn't matter. If I do this right, history won't remember me anyway. I had spent my career in the corners of physics where theory turns to heresy. Dark energy, temporal folds, all the little cracks in reality that respectable scientists avoided like potholes. But my obsession wasn't with equations. It was with a man. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. To most in my time, he was a faded photograph in a high school history book. To me, he was the fork in the road we never took. The speeches I memorized weren't relics. They were roadmaps to a country that never existed. When he spoke about the moon, it wasn't just about rockets, it was about believing we could be better than we were. Some nights, in the flicker of my desk lamp, I would close my eyes and imagine the motorcade in Dallas, the November air crisp and bright. I'd imagine a sharp crack splitting that air, and then I'd imagine it never came. That was when the whisper started. Not in my ears, but in my mind. Go back. It was madness, of course. Even if the impossible could be made possible, who was I to decide what should have been? History is a brutal teacher, its lessons forged in blood and sacrifice. Take one away and the next lesson might be worse. But every time I saw a child in 2043 rummaging through a trash heap for food, I thought of the promise that never bloomed. Every time I heard another law passed to tighten the leash, I thought of the words "ask not what your country can do for you." And so, in the hollow belly of an abandoned research facility in what used to be Boston, I built the machine. It was not elegant. Time travel rarely is, no matter what the pulp novels promised us. It looked like something cobbled together from a scrapyard. A ring of scorched alloy, copper wires coiled like serpents, glass tubes pulsing with a sickly blue light. It smelled faintly of ozone and regret. The night I finished it, I stood in the center of the ring, holding my breath. My heart was a hammer in my chest. What if I succeed? What if I fail? What if saving him damns us all? The whisper came again, louder this time, threaded with urgency. Go back. I closed my eyes, placed my hand on the worn brass lever, and thought of the man in the open-top car, smiling at a crowd that didn't know they were about to witness the end of an era. God forgive me, I murmured, and I pulled. The world didn't dissolve, it screamed. Reality folded in on itself, a cyclone of light and shadow. My body felt like it was being written and erased at the same time. Memories flashed in fragments. Faces I knew, streets I'd walked, then streets I'd never seen, voices I didn't recognize. For one impossible moment, I saw two histories tangled together, fighting for dominance. And then, silence. The smell of motor oil and autumn leaves filled my lungs. The sound of car horns, laughter, and something else, a kind of excitement you could feel in your bones. Dallas, 1963. I had made it. Somewhere in this city, a man who would become the great what-if of the 20th century was still breathing. And for the first time in years, so was hope. I didn't know yet that hope has teeth.
Chapter 2. The Leap into the Past.
The world slammed back into existence with a breath that cut sharp into my lungs. Dallas, November 21st, 1963. The air was alive with something I hadn't felt in decades. Optimism. Not the kind politicians recite into microphones, but the kind that hums between strangers in the street. The sidewalks pulsed with people. The air carried the scent of roasted peanuts from a vendor's cart. And above it all, the sky was the kind of impossible blue you only ever see in old photographs. For a moment, I simply stood there, disoriented, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The years of ruin I'd come from clung to me like smoke, and it felt almost obscene to be here, in a time before the wound. But then her voice. "Sir, you look a little lost." I turned, and there she was, 20-something, hair the color of autumn wheat catching the sunlight, eyes bright with curiosity and something sharper, purpose. She wore a navy skirt and a cream blouse tucked in with precision, a press badge clipped to her lapel. "First time in Dallas?" she asked, a half-smile curling her lips. I could have lied, but something about her gaze, direct, unflinching, made me tell the truth, or at least a version of it. Something like that. She extended a hand. Claire Mitchell, the Dallas Morning Herald. Her grip was firm, her presence disarming. There was a quickness to her speech, a confidence that spoke of long hours chasing quotes and deadlines. And when she asked my name, I hesitated, not because I didn't have one, but because I suddenly realized every word I spoke here could ripple outward for decades. Jack, I said finally. It wasn't my real name, but it was close enough to feel like mine. Claire studied me for a beat, then nodded toward the street. You picked an interesting week to visit. The president's motorcade is coming through tomorrow, whole city's buzzing. I knew. God help me, I knew. We walked for a while, her pace quick and purposeful, mine slower, absorbing every detail. The storefronts with hand-painted signs, the laughter spilling from a diner's open door, the tinny rock and roll drifting from a passing convertible. It was America in her prime, or at least the version we told ourselves she once was. As she spoke about her work, her voice carried that intoxicating blend of conviction and naivety. She believed in change, in the power of the written word to move hearts. It stirred something in me I hadn't felt in years, not just attraction, but the dangerous warmth of hope. Still, beneath it all, another voice whispered, what if your actions here don't just stop a bullet? What if they erase everything that gave America her steel? I kept pace with Claire, answering her questions in careful half-truths, but my mind kept drifting to tomorrow. The plaza, the car, the sound of history breaking. She caught me staring once, not at her but at the skyline beyond, and tilted her head. You've got that look, she said, like you're standing in the middle of something big. I suppose I am, I murmured. Her smile softened, and for a moment the noise of the city seemed to fade. I wanted to believe that I could change the course of history and still keep this moment, this connection. But I knew time wasn't generous. It took as much as it gave. And somewhere, ticking away in the background, was the clock counting down to the most dangerous day of both our lives.
Chapter 3. Shadows of the Old World.
The first days in Dallas were a strange kind of fever dream, half intoxicating nostalgia, half a gnawing dread I couldn't shake. I slipped into the rhythm of 1963 as if I'd been born to it. Mornings started with the scratchy cheer of a radio DJ announcing the latest Beatles single. Afternoons carried the smell of fresh newsprint from corner stands, and evenings brought that soft orange twilight that made the whole city look like it was painted in sepia. To the people here, this was simply life. To me, it was an exhibit in a living museum, fragile, irreplaceable, and ticking toward its most infamous day. I told myself I was blending in, but the truth is, I was watching everything too closely. I studied the way men shook hands on the street corner, the conversations over coffee in the diner, the casual way people spoke about the president as if his future was certain. And always, somewhere deep in my thoughts, I was charting the path to Dealey Plaza, mentally rehearsing where I'd need to be, when I'd need to move. Claire made all of that harder. She had a way of looking at you that made lies feel heavier. In just a few days, we'd shared lunches at bustling cafes, walks past storefront windows dressed for Thanksgiving, and long conversations where her curiosity chipped away at my guarded answers. She told me about her dream of becoming a national political correspondent. Big stories, real change, as she put it. One evening, she invited me to a small Italian place tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place lit by candles that made the world feel smaller and safer. Over spaghetti and Chianti, she spoke about the space program, civil rights, and how America seemed to be standing at the edge of something extraordinary. It feels, she said, twirling her fork, like we're in a moment we'll be telling our grandchildren about. I smiled, though it wasn't joy in my chest. It was the tightening ache of knowing she was right. And if I succeeded, our grandchildren's stories might be very different. for better or worse. After dinner, we walked beneath a sky scattered with stars, our breath visible in the cool November air. We stopped on a quiet stretch of sidewalk, the street lamps casting gold halos around us. She stepped closer, her gloved hand brushing mine, and for the first time in years, I let myself imagine a future with more than just survival in it. Then she kissed me. It was gentle, unhurried, like she was sealing a promise neither of us could name. But in the back of my mind, the whisper came again. What if your hands save one man and strangle the dream she believes in? I didn't answer it, couldn't. That night, lying awake in my small rented room, I turned the kiss over in my mind like a photograph, knowing it might become a relic of a world that would never exist again, depending on what I did in just a matter of days. The 1960s looked golden from afar. Up close, I could already see the shadows stretching long across the floor.
Chapter 4. The Web of Conspiracy.
By the fourth day, I knew the names. Not just Kennedys, not just Oswalds, the others. The ones who didn't appear in history books but pulled strings behind curtains. The city was louder now, as if it sensed the clock ticking toward the motorcade. The air itself carried a hum of anticipation, half excitement, half something darker. I moved carefully. Every errand, every conversation was part of a map I was drawing in my head. A web with Dealey Plaza at the center. I learned which streets Oswald walked, where he ate, where he kept to himself. But there were other faces too. Men who seemed to fade into the background yet were always near enough to see without being seen. Claire noticed my distraction. One afternoon, over coffee at a corner diner, she leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Jack, you're not just a tourist. You've been watching people like you're casing a joint." I forced a smile. "I'm a writer. I watch." She didn't laugh. "Writers ask questions. You're collecting secrets." I didn't answer, not directly, but when she slid her hand across the table to rest over mine, her touch grounded me in a way nothing else could. There was a warmth in it that made me want to tell her everything, about 2043, about the machine, about the weight of what I was here to do. But I swallowed it down. If I told her the truth now, she might think I was insane. Or worse, she might believe me. That night, I followed a lead into a smoky bar near the freight yards. It was the kind of place where the jukebox played low, the beer was cheap, and conversations died when a stranger walked in. I took a corner booth and pretended to nurse a drink while two men at the far end of the bar talked low. One of them I recognized from the photographs, David Ferry. His name would one day be tangled in the threads of the Kennedy case, but here and now he was very real, his voice low and urgent. I caught fragments, rifle, window, payroll. My pulse quickened. The plan was forming, the pieces aligning exactly as history recorded them, which meant my chance to change it was slipping closer by the hour. When I left the bar, the night air felt colder than it should have. A man in a dark coat stood across the street, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. I told myself it was nothing, just another Dallas night owl. But when I turned the corner, I could feel eyes following me. Later, back in my rented room, I stared at the cracked ceiling and thought about what I'd overheard, about how close I was now. And about the other fear, the one I never let myself linger on for long. What if I stopped them, and in doing so, robbed America of the scars it needed to survive the storms ahead? Claire's words from earlier came back to me, her hand warm over mine. "You're collecting secrets." Yes. And one of them might be that saving a life could break a country.
Chapter 5. The Night Before the Storm.
The night before it all unraveled, Dallas seemed quieter than it had any right to be. The city lights shimmered across wet pavement, the air heavy with the scent of rain that never came. Claire had insisted we meet at a small jazz club just off Elm Street. A place with low ceilings, shadows in the corners, and a trumpet player who made every note sound like a memory. She wore a red dress that caught the light in soft glimmers, her hair pulled back just enough to reveal the curve of her neck. For the first hour, we pretended the world beyond the music didn't exist. We talked about her upcoming article, the stories she wanted to write after the president's visit. She had a list: civil rights, the space race, education reform, each one brimming with the belief that her words could help shape a better America. I envied that certainty. I also feared it. When we stepped outside, the November chill slid between us like a warning. She tucked her arm through mine as we walked, and for a while it felt almost normal. Two people out for a late stroll, the rest of the world asleep. But she sensed my distance. She always did. "You've been somewhere else these last few days," she said softly. "Like you're carrying something too big to name." I stopped under a street lamp, the golden light pooling around us. My throat felt dry, but I forced the words out. "Claire, there's something I need to tell you. Tomorrow." She pressed a gloved finger to my lips. "Tomorrow can wait. Tonight, I just want to know you're here." So I was, for her. We walked back to her apartment, the silence between us less awkward than it was fragile. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Her desk littered with notes, photographs, headlines waiting to be written. She poured us each a glass of wine, and we sat on the couch, our knees brushing, the space between us shrinking until it was gone altogether. Her kiss tasted of warmth and defiance, as if she could hold back time itself. My hands memorized the shape of her, my mind whispering over and over, "Remember this. You may not get another chance." Later, lying with her in the soft darkness, I let myself speak in half-truths, about sacrifice, about choices that can't be undone, about how the smallest change can turn the largest tide. She listened without pressing, though I could feel her heartbeat quicken against my chest. "I believe in change," she murmured, "even if it scares us." I wished I could believe in it the same way. When she drifted to sleep, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing every step I would take tomorrow in my mind. The vantage point, the crowd, the exact second when history would hold its breath. For a moment, I let myself imagine the world that could follow, a nation unbroken by that shot, united in hope instead of grief. But then another vision crept in. A country untested by pain, brittle in ways no one could see until it was too late. By dawn, I knew only this: whatever happened tomorrow, there would be no turning back.
Chapter 6. The Moment of Salvation.
Dealey Plaza was smaller than I'd imagined. In the grainy black and white photos I'd studied for years, it had seemed vast, a sprawling stage for the final act of a tragedy. But standing there, boots on the curb, the place felt almost intimate. A shallow bowl of streets and brick, where every sound seemed to echo longer than it should. The November sun was bright, the air crisp with a hint of cut grass drifting from the park. Around me, the crowd buzzed with warmth and anticipation. Men in hats craned their necks, women in gloves adjusted their coats, children balanced on their fathers' shoulders. Somewhere behind me, Claire was working the crowd, notebook in hand, capturing quotes and impressions for a story she would never write the same way again. I could hear her voice rise in brief laughter, and for a moment, I wanted to turn, to fix her face in my mind one last time before everything changed. But the clock in my head was already ticking. I'd positioned myself where the line of sight was clean, the same vantage point the records had described. I knew the moment by heart, the curve of the street, the cheer that would swell, the wave of Kennedy's gloved hand, and then the crack that would split history in two. The motorcade appeared at the far end of Houston Street, a gleam of chrome and color moving through the sun. Kennedy sat tall in the open car, his navy suit sharp against the pale interior, Jackie beside him in her pink suit and pillbox hat, smiling as if nothing in the world could touch them. The first cheer rolled over us. My pulse quickened. I scanned the windows. 6th floor. Depository. A faint shadow behind the glass movement. My chest tightened. Now. I slipped through the edge of the crowd, my hand tightening around the weight in my coat pocket. The noise around me swelled with excitement. Then, from above, the glint of a rifle barrel. Time slowed. The rifle twitched downward, and I saw the flash of the first muzzle movement. Not yet a shot, but the tightening before it. I moved on instinct, a lunge that felt both clumsy and impossibly precise. My hand caught the cold steel just as it barked, forcing the muzzle toward the far wall. The shot went wide, the crack still deafening but harmless. Gasps and screams tore through the plaza. The crowd scattered in waves, people diving for cover. I yanked the weapon from the shooter's hands, the man's face registering shock before panic. Below, Kennedy's head turned sharply at the commotion, but he was untouched, alive. I should have felt relief, triumph. Instead, as the Secret Service surged around the car, as Claire's wide eyes found mine through the chaos, all I felt was the faint chill of something unseen shifting. In Claire's gaze, there was no joy, only a flicker of fear, as if she sensed something bigger than either of us had just been set in motion. The president's car roared away, leaving behind a plaza littered with echoes, and as the adrenaline ebbed, a thought slid, uninvited, into my mind. You did it. You stopped the bullet. But what else did you just start?
Chapter 7. Waves of Change.
In the days that followed, the world felt lighter. Newspapers screamed the headlines in bold black ink. Kennedy survives assassination attempt. There were photographs of the president smiling from the steps of Air Force One. Jackie beside him, her pink suit immaculate. Television anchors spoke of divine providence, of a turning point in the nation's history. In coffee shops and church basements, people talked about the second chance America had been given. A second Camelot. A future unspoiled by that terrible November day. Claire was radiant. She threw herself into the story, her articles full of optimism and sharp-eyed detail. Her byline began appearing on the front page. One evening, as she read a letter from her editor praising her work, she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since I arrived. An unguarded joy. "This is it, Jack," she said. "The world's turning in the right direction again. I can feel it." I wanted to believe her. God knows I tried. We spent our evenings in the quiet comfort of her apartment, a record player spinning softly in the corner, the city's lights blinking through the window like distant stars. We cooked dinners together, simple meals, but they tasted richer than anything I remembered from my own time. We made plans, spoke in when instead of if. But the whisper in my mind hadn't gone silent. It began in the smallest ways. A conversation with a banker who complained about market jitters after the White House announced a military scaleback in Southeast Asia. A factory foreman muttering about contracts that might never come now that defense spending was on the table for cuts. The stock ticker printing numbers that slipped lower each week. One night, while Claire slept, I sat at her desk, flipping through her notes from recent interviews. Buried between quotes about hope and unity was a single line from a steelworker in Pittsburgh. "If the government won't keep the orders coming, I don't know how we'll keep the doors open." I stared at that line for a long time. Was this the first tremor? Or had this fault line always been there, waiting for someone like me to widen it? Claire stirred and mumbled my name, pulling me back to her side. I lay there listening to her breathing, feeling the warmth of her against me, and tried to drown the whisper in the sound of it. But in the dark, another thought crept in. What if saving Kennedy saved the dream, but robbed America of the spine it would have grown from the nightmare? And for the first time since Dealey Plaza, I wondered whether I had truly changed the future, or merely delayed the storm.
Chapter 8. Cracks in the Foundation.
By 1968, the shine had started to dull. The banners of hope that had once hung across America's streets now looked worn at the edges, colors fading under an economy that seemed to sag month after month. The headlines were still polite, still wrapped in the rhetoric of adjustment and transition, But the truth lived in the empty storefronts and the factory gates chained shut. I'd married Claire the year before. A quiet ceremony, just us, a minister, and a pair of witnesses who would forget our names by nightfall. I told myself that this, her hand in mine, her laughter filling the small apartment we'd made our own, was the true reason I'd stayed in this time. Not politics, not Kennedy, just her. But even love couldn't drown out the sound of the foundation shifting. Kennedy was still in office, his speeches as eloquent as ever, his promises stitched with the language of unity. Vietnam was averted, thousands of lives never lost to jungle mud and fire. Yet the jobs tied to that war, the contracts, the steel, the shipping never came. Towns that had thrived on those industries were now hollowing out, their sons heading north in search of work, their main streets dimming like old film reels. At night, after we tucked our son into bed, Claire and I would sit at the kitchen table with the radio humming low. She still defended the dream. She believed the slump was temporary, the sacrifices necessary to build a better future. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt that had followed me from 2043 was growing louder, no longer a whisper but a steady knock. One evening, she caught me staring out the window at the empty street below, my coffee going cold. "You're somewhere else again," she said softly. "Just thinking," I replied. "About the president?" I hesitated, then nodded. Her eyes softened, but there was a shadow there too. "You did something that saved a life and changed the world. But you can't control every ripple, Jack. No one can." Her faith in me was unshakable. My faith in myself less so. In bed that night, I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, and tried to imagine our son growing up in a country that was bending under an invisible weight. Would he inherit the promise I thought I'd secured, or a hollow echo of it? I remembered the way Kennedy had looked that day in the plaza, startled but alive. I thought I was giving him back to the people. Now I wondered if I had stolen something from them instead. The hard lessons forged in fire, the unity that comes not from avoiding pain, but from enduring it together. And yet, in the soft warmth of Claire's hand against mine, in the sound of our boys' laughter from the other room, there was still hope. Hope that maybe this was just a storm to be weathered, not the first crack before the fall. But storms have a way of revealing weaknesses you never knew were there.
Chapter 9. Rise of the Shadows.
By 1980, the hope that had once lit the country like a sunrise had burned down to embers. Kennedy's second term had ended years earlier. He was older now, still a figurehead of charisma, but the nation beneath him had changed in ways no speech could reverse. Without the crucible of Vietnam, America had sidestepped the grief and fury that would have torn it apart, but it had also skipped the forging of resilience that might have held it together. Industry had withered, factories closed, towns emptied, and unemployment rose like a slow tide. The economic storm had made people hungry, not just for jobs, but for certainty, and certainty came dressed in uniforms and flags. The men who rose to power weren't the dreamers of the new frontier. They were strategists, cold-eyed and efficient. They spoke of stability, of unity, of restoring the American spirit. But their America had narrower streets and higher walls. Censorship crept in like fog, at first barely noticed, then suddenly everywhere. Newspapers printed fewer uncomfortable truths. Radios played fewer dangerous songs. Neighbors spoke in lowered voices. And in our home, the air was changing too. Claire still wrote, but her assignments were approved before they ever reached her desk. She told herself it was just a phase, that the country was adjusting, finding its footing. But I saw the unease in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. I saw the way she avoided certain topics, even with me. Our son, Michael, was 15 now, tall, restless, full of questions. Too many questions. I told him to be careful with them, to save them for home, but he pushed back in that fearless way only the young can. "If you're afraid to ask, Dad, Then what's the point of living here at all? I didn't have an answer. One night, after Michael had gone to bed, Claire and I sat in silence at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She reached for my hand, but there was hesitation in the gesture, as if she was weighing whether even touch could be overheard in this new America. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "Jack, I keep thinking about that day in Dallas, about what you did, and I wonder, would it have been better if—" She stopped herself, eyes glistening. The question hung there between us, heavy as a noose. I stared at her, feeling the old weight settle on my chest, the same weight I'd carried through the years, the same whisper that had haunted me since the moment I pushed that rifle aside. I saved one man, but maybe I doomed millions. Outside, the streets were quiet in that wrong kind of way, the kind of quiet that means everyone's learned to keep their heads down. And in that silence, I began to understand something I hadn't dared admit before. History hadn't bent toward the light when I changed it. It had simply found a darker path to the same destination.
Final chapter. Rise of the Shadows.
By 1983, America was unrecognizable. The flag still hung over government buildings, but its colors seemed muted, as though the cloth itself had absorbed the quiet fear that now lay over the land. The streets were clean, the crime low, and yet no one smiled in the open anymore. Conversations died when a stranger walked by. People looked over their shoulders not for muggers, but for listeners. I had survived 2 decades in this altered history. Claire had not. She was taken from me quietly, without scandal or trial, her byline suddenly absent from the paper one winter morning. They said it was illness. I knew better. She'd asked too many questions for too long. Michael was a man now, but a careful one, his rebellious spark dimmed to embers. He visited when he could, always glancing at the door, always lowering his voice. The laughter I remembered from his boyhood was gone, replaced by measured words and polite caution. And I was a man haunted not by the day I failed, but by the day I succeeded. Dealey Plaza played in my mind like a film loop, the gleam of the motorcade, the gloved hand waving, my lunge toward the rifle barrel. I had thought that single act would save a nation. Instead, it had preserved a face, a smile, a symbol, while erasing the fire that comes from struggle. Without Vietnam, without the cultural quakes of the late 60s, America had never built the antibodies against tyranny. She had slipped into it gently like a patient into sleep. Some nights, I'd sit in my darkened kitchen with a bottle of bourbon, staring at the timepiece I had kept hidden for 20 years, the one remnant of the machine that had brought me here. I would hold it in my palm and imagine turning the clock back again, letting the shot ring out, watching history bleed as it once had. Would it have been better? Would Claire still be alive? Would Michael have grown up in a freer world, even if it was a more wounded one? Hope is a cruel thing. Keeps you breathing, but it also keeps you asking questions that have no answers. One night in December, the air outside heavy with snow, I stood at my window and saw my reflection in the glass. Older, wearier. A man shaped by choices he could neither undo nor forget. In my mind, I heard Claire's voice, that night in 1963 when we first kissed under the street lamp. Even if it scares us. It did scare me, still does. I turned the timepiece over in my hand. The hum was still there, faint but alive, a promise that time was not yet done with me. Maybe I thought I could try again, risk the chaos, invite the pain, give America back the wound she needed to heal into something stronger. Or maybe I would only break her further. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as snow began to fall. And in the stillness of that moment, I realized the cruelest truth of all. It's not the past we change when we go back. It's ourselves.